Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about peak week. But before we start, I have to make it clear that for peak weeks, it generally varies from person to person. So I can't really give you guys any specific numbers or ranges to go by. I'll just give you guys a couple of tips, a couple of general rules as you go through your peak week and as you get closer to your show. The first peak week commandment, which I really can't stress enough, is that peak week won't even matter if you're not lean enough to begin with. During a peak week, in general, you will be bumping up your calories, you will be bumping up your carb intake. So it really isn't meant for losing more fat. If you make it to 1 week out and you're, just not lean enough, you have two options there. The first one being to push harder with your deficit, and the second one to move your show to a later date. Number 2 on this list, the goal of peak week is to not look any worse than you have during your prep. Your goal should be to go from shredded to shredded with some added fullness. There is absolutely nothing magical about a peak week. So if you didn't do your homework during your prep, you're probably not going to see much of a difference. In fact, if you attempt anything too drastic, chances are you're probably going to look worse during the show. Which leads me to point number 3. And this is one of the most common problems I see in how many competitors peak. Drastically cutting your sodium, your water, and your carbohydrates, especially for an extended period of time, will only make you look flat and stringy. You will need all 3 of these to interact properly to create that desired full look. I think we've all seen it. We've seen competitors who look great 1 week out, 2 weeks out, but when it comes to show day, they look extremely flat, they look extremely soft. And most of the time, I feel it's from messing with these variables without giving enough consideration to how it works. That said, point number 4, if you don't know what you're doing, you're better off not doing it. So don't do anything too different, don't do anything too drastic. For example, let's just say you've been crash dieting the whole time and you've never actually run a refeed during your prep. Do not even try to run something like a rapid backload. Don't go around playing with dumb shit on your peak week just because you heard someone else do it. Again, every prep is different. Every competitor is also different. So copying someone else's process will not give you the same look. I mean, you've prepped for so long, you've gone through enough discomfort just to make it a stage. Don't waste it by doing something stupid, please. In relation to this, point number 5, do not try to incorporate foods that you haven't had during your prep. There is no special food for peaking, so unless you are competing in a foreign place with a different food environment, you should be consuming most, if not all, of the same food you were having during your prep. Stop messing with things, try to keep things more predictable. This of course leads to number 6 on this list, which is peaking should be a predictable process. And predictability comes from repetition. As much as possible, test everything beforehand. Not necessarily in one go, but maybe have sort of like a test peak on your refeed if you're on or ahead of schedule. Try out your food timing based on the potential show schedule. Try out your usual carb sources. Check which ones give the best responses and make sure to take note of everything. Again, being able to test things out, to take note of things, to give yourself more data will only make this whole peak week process much more predictable. Going back to data, on your peak week, and even before your peak week, make sure you're taking consistently lit, consistently set photos of yourself. Take photos when you're flat, take photos as you deplete, take photos as you load up on your carbs, take photos when you're at your fullest. Because during that tail end of prep, your scale weight, which used to be a good point of reference to know where you're at, is going to fluctuate significantly with changes in food intake. Which means do not panic. Nobody from the judges or from the audience will ask you what your stage weight is. So at this point, just base it on the photos, just base it on what you look like in the mirror, how you feel, since that's really going to be the most accurate representation of how your physique is looking. Moving on to, I think, the 8th commandment of this list. Stop overworking yourself. It's called a peak week because you're trying to peak. It's not peak week because you're driving yourself down into the bottom. Heightened stress, heightened cortisol, unnecessary inflammation will not create a favorable environment for your peaking. Unreasonably psyching yourself out, driving yourself down into the ground will negatively affect your absorption, your digestion, and most likely your sleep. So as much as possible, try to cut your stressors, find a way to relax, and enjoy this period where you do less work, and in most cases where you consume more food. And of course, the last one, now would be a good time to make sure everything is ready. From your tanning appointment, to your accommodation booking if you need one, to your posing suit, your waxing, your posing, and pretty much everything else that you might need leading up to the show. I can't stress this enough. You really need to double check everything as early as possible. A little stress on peak week isn't great, but adding stress to your show day is probably the worst thing you can do. That just about wraps this video up. Those were the 9 generic commandments of peak week. So if you like this video, leave a thumbs up. If you have any more questions regarding peak week or regarding show day, leave it in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.